This is your primer on all things the Japanese women's national team as we get set for a rare treat, as the second-ranked U.S. women's national team is set to face eighth-ranked Japan 3 times over 7 days. It all kicks off on Saturday night. For Emma Hayes, it's a crucial test against a respected opponent with the World Cup just 14 months away. While the U.S. has had the upper hand in this one, this matchup has been defined by the biggest moments, but all of them coming now about a decade or so ago. 2 World Cup finals, an Olympic gold medal match. So on today's show, we answer the questions, is the heat back between these two rivals, should we call them? And are Japan World Cup 2027 contenders? And as per usual, on every Wednesday, there is no way I could get us through this show by myself. So now we bring in Tamerra Griffin. Hello, Tamerra.
Hi, Jill.
How are you?
I am basking in the afterglow of a recent birthday. I turned 36 on Monday.
What a horrible co-host I am. This was supposed to be the birthday.
This
was supposed
fine.
to be the birthday episode. I forgot. Happy birthday to Tamerra Griffin.
I told our producer, Theo, and he was like, oh, yeah, because you are always going on about Aries, which is fair.
Yeah, you only tipped us off 600 times and we didn't take the bait. Well, what better way, Tamerra, to celebrate a birthday than to dive deep into the Japanese women's national team?
I mean, I could ask for nothing more, truly.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So we're going to celebrate. We're going to celebrate in our own little full-time way here today. And again, I feel like maybe this is unjust or unfair, but because of your wealth of wisdom and wealth of knowledge, I have no doubt that you are going to ace this. But as I was looking, as I was looking at this trio of games ahead and the locations, one in particular, I was like, ooh, cool. When was the last time they played there? So it got me thinking. My trivia question for you is, can you name, we'll do the year. If you can do the month, that's like bonus points. But the opponent of the last time that this team played here. It'll be the U.S. women's national team versus X when we go through these trio of cities ahead. Okay, so the first one being PayPal Park. Who was the opponent the last time the U.S. women's national team played in San Jose?
As a NorCal girly, I'm glad that we're starting out pretty easy. It helps that I was also at this game. Fun fact to add on to the trivia, because I'm extra, and it's still my birthday in my mind. I had just joined the Athletic full time, and this game was the second game that I covered as a full-time Athletic women's soccer writer. So I could never forget that they played Brazil around this time last year at PayPal Park in San Jose.
Off the charts. April 2025. Tamerra Griffin going full-time on full time. They've made 6 total visits. The U.S. women's national team, 5 wins and 1 loss, one at PayPal Park. This is the really interesting one. Lumen Field.
Yeah.
Yes, in Seattle, Washington. Who did they play the last time they were at Lumen Field? I'll give you a hint because this one's tough.
Thank you. I was going to ask for a phone a friend.
It was July of 2017.
Okay, I knew it was 2017. I was hoping to get partial credit for at least knowing that, but you already said it, so I'm still back where I started. I am at a loss. I'm just going to throw something out there. I mean, part of me is like, maybe it was Japan. But I also am feeling like it might have been Iceland.
Okay, you were closer geographically with Japan.
South Korea?
Australia?
Oh, okay.
Iceland's
I see what
just
you
a
meant
lot
now,
further away. Yes, U.S. women's national team played Australia there in July of 2017. The only other match was against Brazil in October of 2015. All right,
interesting.
Finally, Dick's Sporting Goods Park, the U.S. women's national team played who there last?
This one also gives me a boost because I was also at this game. It was also recent, last summer, Republic of Ireland.
Ding, 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 where they got a 4-0 victory in June of 2025. They fare quite well there. 9 visits, 8 wins, and just 1 draw. Glowing colors, Tamerra Griffin. All right, let's dive into this current Japanese squad, though, because let's just say they got some things going on. They got some things going on, and I'm sure Emma Hayes didn't have this on her radar when she said, I want to play this really challenging, top-ranked Japanese women's national team. So to discuss that and so much more, we're going to have producer Theo join us now.
Hello. Happy late birthday, Tamerra.
Thank you.
I honestly know that if you owned the world, which in many ways you already do, you would have fixed things so that the Japanese women's national team were in the United States on your birthday or for your birthday week. I do feel like you are winning.
I mean, the deeper I get into this world, it was, like I said, this time last year that they were playing Brazil, which also feels like it could have
Big
been
win.
birthday ordained. Those games were a lot of fun. I actually squeezed in a concert. I saw Cleo Sol in between the first and second legs of those Brazil games. So who knows what I might get up to on this leg. But yeah, I'm feeling very spoiled and blessed by the football gods for these matchups.
I love that. All right, let's get into the U.S. and Japan. But before we look forward, let's look backwards just a tad. There have been some big-time heavyweight matches over the years. So the first time Japan played the USA was back in 1986. The U.S. won that one 3-1. And since then, there's been 41 meetings between these two sides. The U.S., with the advantage, 31 wins, 8 draws, 2 wins, going to Japan. That's a pretty one-sided record considering the fact where we think of where these two nations are at now, Tamerra. Japan ranked 8th in the world and fresh off of winning the 2026 Asian Cup.
Yeah. I am someone who has always, I guess similar to U.S. soccer, clearly, had tremendous respect for Japan. I think from their style of play, from the individual talent. I have a piece that'll soon be coming out about this to sort of help people get ready and hopefully excited about these matchups later in the week. But so I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this team. And I do think that their consistency over the years is actually one of their greatest strengths, even if the results in games and in tournaments has varied, which if I'm putting myself in the shoes of a national team head coach and the prospect of playing any team 3 times, I think there's a lot to be gained from the knowledge of that consistency. I think that some of the players on Japan's team are literally some of the best in the world, that depending on how things go for them this year with their clubs, whether they're playing in Champions League or the NWSL, boosted, of course, by this continental win at the Asian Cup, could and should absolutely be putting them in Ballon d'Or conversations. So it's a really exciting time. We will talk about one of the major factors that is diluting that excitement just a bit when it comes to these 3 games that we're preparing for. But I am expecting to be like gripping the edge of my chair all 3 times because they could truly go either way, these games.
Yeah, and you know what? Let's not leave the people hanging. Let's get into that, Theo.
Cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger. Can you tell the girl's a writer? 12 days.
She's good.
12 days, Theo. After leading the team to the Asian Cup title, the Japanese Football Association parts ways with their manager.
Yeah, T kind of
teased it.
Yeah, she teased it there. And it's an interesting one because I think, as you can tell, listener, the reason we're doing this show, we're all so excited about the United States playing Japan, this heavyweight matchup, 3 ties. But the fact that the Japanese Federation decided to part ways with Niels Nielsen and let him walk at the expiration of his contract and his assistant as well is an interesting moment that makes you think, on the one hand, in a positive light, maybe just over a year out from the World Cup, they want to improve the coaching department and get an even better manager. On the other hand, it makes you think, what is the chaos going on here? Why wasn't this person who just won the Asian Cup good enough to take them to the World Cup? It's really hard to know without hearing from Niels Nielsen. The Federation put out a very brief statement and held a press conference that sort of talked about the sort of manager they're looking for. But I think it's a real element of chaos that, unfortunately, when they come over under a caretaker manager, it does feel like we're not going to know if this is the full version of Japan. But there's probably people out there, and Tamerra, I know you've been researching a lot for this article you've been writing, that people believe so much in the Japanese education, the academy, the style of play, that maybe, just maybe, the manager isn't the most important person in the room.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, it's significant that Niels Nielsen not only won a continental title with Japan, but also beat the U.S. women's national team the last time these two teams played in the SheBelieves Cup of 2025. Like, those
just to go back to Jill's point about the record, that's the second ever win in 90 minutes Japan has ever had against the US. So it's not like that was easy to get. As much as we everyone on this pod highly rates Japan, it's a very good win.
100%. And those are two heavy bullet points to put on your CV as a manager. I don't care who you're coaching, honestly. And I just think, to your point, Theo, about the chaos itself is very uncharacteristic of this federation when it comes to the women's team. So maybe I'm still sucking on my own birthday fumes and feeling extra optimistic, but it's hard for me to see something that was so abrupt and not believe or want to believe that there is a plan in place. We just don't know what it is yet. I mentioned this to you both once before we started recording, but if I'm thinking of, I don't even have names in terms of theories about who might replace Nielsen, but at this point, it kind of has to be someone who has the capacity to do what Emma Hayes did with the U.S. women's national team. And by that, I mean joining the team months before an Olympics and taking home gold. Obviously, this person, should have a bit more runway, depending on when they appoint them. But that's, if they have their eyes on a World Cup, and it seems like so much of the rest of the world is putting them in that conversation, that's going to be what it takes. That's going to be the bar at this point.
And Nielsen's resume was really, nothing to foo-foo at. 54 years old, had served as the director of soccer for Manchester City's women's team, had managed the Swiss women's national team from 2018 to 2022, and the Danish women's national team prior to that. Have they named an interim?
Yes, there's a caretaker manager. His name is Michichisa Kano. He was already part of the Japanese Federation national coaching staff. He also manages Sagawa Shiga FC. And they've also kind of just, I believe, for this international window in the United States, they've also brought in Kaisuke Ota, who is on the University of Central Florida coaching staff. So he's in the United States. He's also going to be assisting the caretaker manager for this international window.
Okay, thank you. So that gets everybody kind of caught up on the drama. That's what's unfolded over the last week. Now let's get back a little bit into the rivalry that is the USA-Japan, as Japan has kind of risen to this next tier level football federation on the women's side. The rivalry, when you look at the first era of it, would be 2011 to 2015. The U.S. and Japan facing off in 3 consecutive finals, 2 World Cup finals, and an Olympic gold medal match sandwiched in between those. Theo, can you kind of walk us through these games?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one for the listener who maybe hasn't been following, women's football for that long, because 15 years ago, Japan-USA was the creme de la creme. It was, maybe for fans now, correct me if you feel differently, Jill and Tamerra, almost a bit like England-Spain.
Yeah, great comp.
Yeah, it's kind of like, it was like the England-Spain of the early 2010s. And so when you saw these two come together, you knew it was going to be a classic. You didn't know necessarily what the outcome was going to be. And like we said about that record, it wasn't like Japan had come on in the 1980s and 90s and been a powerhouse. This was a kind of a golden generation, if you like, that came to fruition in 2011 and did something which was, at the time, an unthinkable upset, which was beat the United States on a penalty shootout. It finished 2-2 in Germany at the 2011 World Cup, where the US were heavily, heavily favored in what was just an absolutely classic match. The US went up twice, 1-0 and then 2-1 in extra time, and Homari Sawa gets the equalizer in the 117th minute to send it to penalties, where then Shannon Box, Carly Lloyd, and Tobin Heath all missed penalty kicks, like I said, to seal this sort of iconic World Cup win for Japan in 2011, which was unthinkable. But that sort of gave the Japanese an immeasurable amount of confidence and boosted them into the world stage and onto this rivalry status with the United States. So much so that the next time they met in 2012, the Japanese won again in a friendly. And so that was their first win in 90 minutes over the US. And that kind of period with the next two finals to come, there really wasn't anyone else, I think, taking it to the States like the Japanese were. So yeah, that was the 2011 final. T, I'll let you set the scene on the 2012 Olympic gold medal match.
Yeah, huge game, 80,200 plus in attendance. The U.S. won 2-1. And I just remember there's something about the women's game having a World Cup immediately followed by an Olympics that often feels like a continuation of a conversation, because usually the teams that are going far in the World Cup, because of the quick turnaround, you're going to see similar faces at the Olympics.
Carly Lloyd she gets the brace in that final, and that sort of tees up the next chapter, which, you know, before we leave 2012, I think, again, Japan actually beats the USA in a friendly around this time. And weirdly, these two teams, because of the 2011 World Cup final and the 2012 Olympic final, they actually played each other 5 times in less than a year. So, you know, new USA fans who are getting used to this trio of friendlies, the Japanese and the US, when they like to play each other, they play each other a lot. And so in that strange period in 2011, 2012, they actually kind of almost split the series. The USA won 2 of those games. Japan one on a penalty shootout and 1 in 90 minutes, and then there was another draw. So again, to think of another major nation splitting a series with the USA across 2 finals it just goes to show how good the Japanese were 15 years ago, and maybe how it's taken them a decade to kind of get back there. But quickly on that last final, again, Carly Lloyd gets the brace in London, wins the gold medal for the United States, and then arguably Carly Lloyd delivers. Maybe I'll tee you up, Jill, here. Probably the most iconic moment of her career in the final of the 2015 World Cup in Canada.
Okay, perfect. One of my favorite soccer cities in the North America, Vancouver, just because it's so darn beautiful. And it gets a bad rap at times, but there's something really special, I would say, about BC Place, especially when that place is packed. And it was for the 2015 World Cup final, attendance 53,000 plus on hand. And this game, not so tight. USA 5, Japan 2, including a Juilliard's own goal. But luckily, that didn't really matter because Carly Lloyd had a hat trick in that game, including 2 goals inside of the first 5 minutes in that one, followed by Lauren Holiday, followed back by Carly Lloyd. So the U.S. was up 4-0 within the first 16 minutes of that match, and they go on to win it 5-2. 6 of the starting 11 played in that World Cup final game, Tamerra, that you mentioned in 2011, and Jill Ellis was the head coach.
It feels like that game, you know, what did people do? It was the sage. It kind of like
it smudged the
2011 World Cup final defeat to Japan, and it in many ways Japan have never got back there since 2015. So whereas the US were able to go on and win the 2019 World Cup, and maybe what we saw in the Vlatko era was a transition that needed to happen, Japan after 2015 almost went through their transition, and maybe we're seeing a decade later this group of young players come through and bring Japan back to where they were. But that kind of 2011 to 2015 era, like we've kind of just tried to trace over, it was a moment for the US where they had to take their medicine a little bit. And then that final kind of got them back on top.
If I was Emma Hayes, I would make maybe like a bit of a sizzle highlight reel of kind of that era that we just covered. And show it to the youngsters, perhaps. Because, yes, they've had tight games, and we're going to discuss those in a moment, that have transpired over the last year or two, but not with the meaning of World Cup finals and Olympic gold medal matches. Okay, so when you look ahead, like you mentioned, Theo, it's been about a decade where things got tight again. 2023 SheBelieves Cup in Nashville, USA beats Japan 1-0 thanks to Mal Swanson. And then in the 2024 Olympic quarterfinals, the same score, 1-0, the US wins Trinity Rodman in the 105th minute in Paris. And then most recently, the SheBelieves Cup in 2025, USA 1 falls to Japan 2. Tamerra, the game you mentioned at the top of the show, that match back in San Diego. So yes, the sizzles are back, the feels are back. But when you look at the U.S. women's national team as a whole, let's say over the last 10 to 15 years, Where do you put Japan as a U.S. women's national team rival?
It's so interesting because it's almost like I want to come up with a different word to describe the dynamic and the relationship and the history between these two teams, because I think of other national teams like the US's continental rivals in Canada and Mexico. And the temperature and flavor of those rivalries is so much more similar than what I would ascribe to the US and Japan. I think that when the U.S. suits up to play against Canada, they're low-key, packing. You know what I mean?
They're ready for a fight.
Yeah.
Japan is
spiritually.
it's true. Japan is not a fight. It's like
Japan, it's
dance.
Yeah. It's there's just something so much more. And I'm gonna use I want to use the word respect, but I don't want to imply that they don't respect Canada and Mexico.
No,
but it's just different. I think it's because they played each other so many times. And of course, yes, the US has played Canada a bunch of times too. But I think that maybe it's because Japan's style of play is both so different from the foundation of the U.S. style of play historically, which I would say is way more similar to Canada's and probably less so, but still similar to Mexico's as well. But this is what I think makes U.S.-Japan such an enticing matchup, no matter where you are in the timeline. The style of play is so different, but it's like the perfect complement. They complement each other so well, and I think what both teams get out of playing each other supplements their styles so well too that it reminds me of when I used to play. There was that opponent that you always didn't even hide how much you were looking forward to playing them, because you just knew, regardless of the result, that you were going to get better as a result of it.
Yeah, and that's exactly Emma Hayes' outlook, obviously, in booking this team 3 times, that it's not going to be foul city like we saw a few weeks ago. Maybe no punches thrown, but it is going to be good, methodical soccer. So rivalry is a tough word because the U.S. has dominated, but I still think when you've been defined by big moments, it almost can jumpstart into that, because you just look at those 2 World Cup finals and, Japan taking one on penalties and then the U.S. kind of coming in and dominating in the second. It can come down to a few big moments.
I think, T, I want to kind of hear you, for anyone who maybe isn't familiar, can you define Japan's style of play? Because you mentioned there that it complements or it contrasts with the US. And I think there's an element of when Emma Hayes came in, she wanted to reinvigorate or adapt, let's say, the US style of play. And I think she sees Japan as a way of iron sharpening iron. So for anyone who maybe isn't familiar, when you say Japan's style of play, could you go into a little bit more detail there?
I think the more that I've been researching and learning and having conversations with people about Japan, whose team name is Nadeshiko, I think a lot of Spain, to be honest with you, in terms of the intentionality that goes into building the foundation of their federation, in terms of the youth academies, in terms of the close attention to detail that this team trains with. It is so crisp. These players are technically excellent. They like to play through the midfield. They do their own sort of version of tiki-taka, which is why I think Spain is a helpful sort of comparison if you've not seen this team play or haven't paid close attention to it. And something that I think people might assume is not the case, that I want to correct and say very much is, Japan is a physical team, but their physicality is of a different shade, let's say, than we're used to seeing in the U.S. So I watch someone like Yui Hasegawa, and if you know me or if you listen to this show and listen for any opportunity I have to sprinkle some respect on that Manchester City midfielder, you know how I feel about her. But what I think makes her game so exceptional is the way she engages her weight distribution. And it allows her to go up against pretty much any player in the Women's Super League. So when you watch Japan play, it might be easy to think, if you have some preconceived notions about what an Asian football team might bring to the table, that they're not going to be aggressive. You would be wrong, saying it with love. They are. It just looks very different from what you see mostly in the NWSL. But the thing is, there are many Japanese players in the NWSL now, many of whom play for the national team. And what I think has sort of allowed Nadeshiko to sort of unlock and shift gears into this next level, which is resulting in this sort of tightening of the rivalry that we're seeing now, is the fact that so many of them are featuring crucially and centrally to top clubs, not only in the NWSL, but across Europe too. So they're adding to their toolkits individually and then coming back together and proving to be pretty unstoppable. So I forgot what the question was. I'm so sorry. This is what happens when I start talking about Japan.
Japan's style of play. Japan's style of play. Great midfield, right? I think that's what we know of Japan. They always want to play. They move. I also think the difference
Which also
they have,
serves this parallel with Spain, you could say.
Yes. I think the difference between Spain and Japan, in my opinion, is I do think what Japan do really well is they can move up the pitch quicker than Spain. Like, if you think about tiki-taka in its most traditional form being like all about where you are in a position on a grid, I actually think what's interesting about Japan is they're happy to play it out from the back. They're happy to like absorb pressure. But when they see a break, they move really fast and almost like they want you to press them because Yui Hasegawa, right, is so press resistant. So she wants you to come up and get close to her so she can swivel her hips and come out of pressure. And the pressure, the space the player leaves by pressing her is exactly what she wants. So I think Japan invite pressure, I think, differently to a team like Spain that want to dominate the ball. I actually think Japan, and to any listener who's like, okay, what do you mean? Go and watch Japan beating Spain 4-0 at the 2023 World Cup in New Zealand. That performance is one of the best counter-attacking, quick vertical tiki-taka performances you'll ever see. And I think it gets across Japan's style of play really well.
Love it. Perfect game to put on the syllabus.
Perfect game to put on the syllabus, yeah.
Welcome back to Full Time. When it comes to the U.S. women's national team, it is no secret that the expectations are to go win the Olympics, go win the World Cup. And the 2027 World Cup in Brazil is no exception. Last week, in her press conference, Emma Hayes tipped Japan to be one of her favorites to win the 2027 World Cup, saying this: "They're champions of Asia. They're easily one of the best teams in the world. I think this is, without question, one of the favorites to win the World Cup." So what a great test for us. All right, we know here stateside and across the world that the U.S. are the favorites. When you look at Japan, from their point of view, what are the expectations for Japan?
Oof. I think because they beat the U.S. the last time they played each other just a little over a year ago, I think that now that we're in, I'm calling this World Cup Eve year, 2026, inching ever closer to being one calendar year out from the actual World Cup. It's like we're transitioning out of the development sort of stage of things, the rotational stage of things. They've both played, obviously in an Olympics. Japan has the Asian Cup, and into the sort of chiseling down of who's going to be making this roster. I think anytime two teams play each other 3 times consecutively, we are in very unique territory. I think when those two teams are both among the top 10 in the world, even more so. I cannot remember the last time anything like this has happened, which makes it hard to articulate what the expectations are really for either side. I think just like the U.S., Japan are going into it with the intention of winning all 3 games. But that's not necessarily what expectations are. In short, I'm still trying to figure out what that might be. Theo, do you have more cogent thoughts?
I think, too. Yes, we can look at it like zoomed in over these next 3 matches. I guess in terms of the way that they view themselves and the expectations around this federation in firing their manager after winning the Asian Cup. Theo, is this a team that's going in, yes, we want to make it to the semifinals of the World Cup. We want to be in the final. We could win the World Cup. Where do you think fairly Japan sees themselves in this World Cup conversation?
I think there's definitely some questions to be made about the federation, just in terms of clearly the institution and the football education and the way they prepare young players is doing tremendously well. But how do you take really quality young players and get them into a senior environment where they can be the best in the world? And that's where I would maybe have a pinch of salt and say, for this Japan team, maybe making a semi-final or going out against another top nation in a quarterfinal wouldn't be the end of the world, because I really think with the age of this group and young players like Manaka Matsukubo, Mike Hamano, like so many talented players coming through, you really want to build them up to probably towards 2031. And I almost think, again, with managerial change, a lot of uncertainty at the federation, you could argue the federation is not really putting them in a position, in my opinion, to go out and win the next year's World Cup.
So with, playing an opponent 3 times, there's going to be unique challenges. I think a unique eye test for Emma Hayes when she gets to see a player she wants to see. How do they improve? How do they respond to the same type of competition over the course of back-to-back games? How much rotation do you think we should expect to see across these 3 games from Emma Hayes?
Well, we do have a little bit of context that Hayes explained herself in her press conference after the roster was released for these games. And she said that she plans to play one team twice and one team once. Now, we don't know the order in which these teams are going to be played, but I think reading between the lines, we can assume that one of those teams is going to be an A team, a starting team, similar to what we saw her put out against Colombia and Canada at the SheBelieves Cup. Slightly different personnel, of course, between that roster and this one, but same idea. Theo and I feel like every time we talk, do you think it's going to be AAB, BAA, ABA?
Where are you... Tamerra, where are you landing? Because at the SheBelieves Cup, she went BAA. So she kind of started with what you could argue was the not first team. And then against Canada and then Colombia, she kind of elevated the group that she felt was the best group available. Do you think she'll do the same and do the kind of the lesser ready group for the San Jose game and then move to the top group for the back-to-backs in Seattle and Colorado? Or do you think, my gut feeling is I think she might go A. Well, no, because Lumen Field, I feel like she has to play her best team.
Yeah, because initially you were thinking ABA, right?
I was thinking ABA, but now I'm thinking AAB.
Okay.
I think AAB because there's enough time between the matches, them being April 11th, 14th, and 17th, and not a ton of travel. You're going from San Jose, California, just a little trip
Seattle.
Up north to Seattle, and then to Commerce City. So I think it's AAB.
AAB. The nice thing about AAB is I'm also thinking about the altitude factor of that third game in Colorado, and making a team like BAA, for example, is asking a lot of that A team, but in a way that is still geared, you could argue, toward, World Cup preparation. 2 factors I'm also considering here, one of which speaks to the sort of disappointment from a narrative perspective that Niels Nielsen is not going to be with the team, because there's a part of me that if I'm thinking about the competition and the narrative there, he was coaching them at the SheBelieves Cup where Japan won. And so if he was still with the squad, that would sort of justify maybe Emma Hayes wanting to start with an A team.
Right.
Because
you're going to maybe have like a little bit of a rattled Japanese team now in that first game back. Are you getting the best Japan in that first game?
Yeah. And you could argue possibly because they're coming off that Asian Cup victory.
The crazy thing to me is some of these Japan players are basically...
change.
Well, they went from the Asian Cup back to their clubs and now out to the States. So for some of them, they've gone from Australia to Europe and now to the United States in the space of 10 days, 2 weeks. Like, man, if I was on one of these Japan
up on Emma Hayes' whiteboard, that all of this is in the web. It's all in the web.
It's like
Jill,
that calculation.
100%. 100%.
Okay, but my counterpoint to that is...
To yourself.
Granted, this was only, going from Australia back to, say, Munich. Yeah. But we look at what Momoko Tanikawa did in the Champions League right on the heels of that Asian Cup. And you could argue that some of these players have not skipped a beat. Mina Tanaka with Utah Royals scoring in her first game back. Manaka Matsukubo doing the same thing with North Carolina. So
back-to-back weeks for both of those players.
Period. So it's possible that this is not going to be as much of a strain as it might look on paper, especially when you consider that these players have probably been doing some version of this for the bulk of their careers in some way, shape, or form. I think I'm going ABA.
All right.
I think I'm going ABA.
Sorry, I know the listeners are going to get bored of us saying A and B, but you think she's going to play the B team at Lumen Field?
I don't know how much she cares
seems
about
crazy
keeping the
to me.
people
Wait, why?
happy.
Because of the size of the venue?
Because they haven't played at Lumen Field in 10 years. They won't play there again because the US Women's National Team isn't allowed to play on turf, and because they're putting the grass in for the World Cup, that's the reason they're playing at Lumen Field. For me, that is the showpiece.
Here's why. But it depends what the attendance is going to be. If you're going to get that Lumen Field, I've covered finals there. It fits 70,000 plus.
Yeah, maybe
if you're getting 70,000 plus, like a World Cup atmosphere type of game, you're putting your best team out there because you want to see how everybody responds. I don't know what that is going to look like on a midweek.
It makes you wonder why they're not starting at Lumen. And going
you're right.
Lumen,
Maybe the weekend games. No, you're right. I think you might be right. Maybe ABA. I go back and forth.
I'll just stick with AAB, just for the sake.
Let us know your thoughts.
Full-time at theathletic.com.
Dear God,
please, because
we sound like Emma Hayes's whiteboard. But two players that we will be seeing, that we have not seen on this team in over a year, will be Sophia Wilson, back from her maternity leave, and Tiana Davidson, of course, coming back from her ACL injury. So as we put a bow on this Japan 101 episode, what are the expectations for the USA in this 3-game stint against Japan?
I think 2 wins.
You're
going to say 3-0? I think 2 wins minimum. Am I being too harsh?
For an A+? That's a very
not for an A+. Sorry,
bar. Okay.
I just meant expectation.
Oh, I see.
Not A+. I'm saying, like, I think if the US were to win fewer than 2 games, people would be concerned.
I agree.
Or were to like lose the series. So I guess if they like tied one, they could maybe get away with the tie loss win. But I think you can't lose the series.
No, you can't lose the series. I also think whenever Hayes puts that A team out for the second time is going to be where she's putting like 80% of her dice, shall we say, or her cards of, go out, you make this mistake, A team, you make that mistake. I think she's going to want to see how this team responds. And I think that's where she's going to be putting the most stock in the A team's second match.
I think you're totally right, Jill. And I think we saw in the Portugal doubleheader not too long ago that often the response can be really good when they do fluff their lines. And the other version of that was when in the doubleheader against Brazil, they were fantastic in the first game. True. And then they dropped their levels in the second game. So the fact that this is not a doubleheader, but a triple header means that idea of, like, to your point, Jill, if they don't come out hot in the first game, but they respond brilliantly in the second game, what does the third game look like? That's just something we've never really seen. Or that's not true. There has been triple headers before, but it's been a decade or so since there was a triple header. It was actually a triple header against Japan, I think, in 1998.
Wow.
So yeah, it's to your point, Jill. I think the response from game to game, I think, will be fascinating. And in a triple header, it's just so hard to predict.
All right. Well, we'll have to predict a little bit less when this all finally begins. This weekend, Saturday night on April 11th, your first match, that game at PayPal Park in San Jose, California, kicking off at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time.
So as we're talking about, our predictions for how this series might go, I want to share with you guys that way back in January at NWSL Media Day in Los Angeles, I had the great opportunity to speak with Utah Royals forward Mina Tanaka and Japan International. And it was just so funny because she was speaking through an interpreter, and we were basically one-on-one because people were distributed all throughout the room talking to other players. And so we had this really substantive conversation for probably close to 10 minutes. I'm asking her about her reflections in the Utah Royals previous season. This was, of course, before the Asian Cup, so I was asking her about her expectations of how the team was going to do, things that you will see in the story that I will soon be writing and publishing on theathletic.com. And then at the very end of the interview, after this 10 minutes of very business, very proper exchange, she says to me, so how many games do you think we're going to win against the U.S.?
Oh,
And you guys, when I tell you, I was so unprepared. There was just such an earnestness and a directness to the question
I love that.
as a journalist, clinging to some sense of neutrality was just shook, but also somewhere between tickled and touched and also oh, okay.
Feeling respected.
Yeah. That made me want to engage with it.
Yeah.
But wait, what's your answer then and now?
Yeah, what the heck did you say?
Yeah, what the heck did you say?
I definitely skirted a super direct answer, which will surprise
So you
neither of
pulled
you.
a player on her, which is kind of...
I pulled a Tamerra on her. And what I said to her was, I think that you will each both win at least one game. And I actually stand by that.
That's a good answer. I would have said the same. Yeah. And I think that's true.
Yeah, exactly. But
I
yeah,
love this story.
To have such a... she was asking me to stand on business, really. And that my response to her question was the respect that comes from someone who asks you to stand on business. So that's just a fun anecdote that I wanted to share that I think fits perfectly into this conversation we're having.
That does it for our show today. We hope that you, the listener, are feeling primed, set, and ready for these 3 matches against Japan. I know I certainly am. We're about to learn a lot more. Thanks, as always, so very much for hanging out with us here on Full Time. As always, you can email us at fulltime@theathletic.com. Our DMs are open all the time at TA Fulltime. You can find us on Instagram or TikTok. Did you know that The Athletic has partnered with Yahoo Sports to provide free, best-in-class coverage of women's sports? That's right. Go check out the Women's Sports Hub at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. That does it for our show today. My name is Jillian Sakovits. A big thanks to Tamerra Griffin and Theo Lloyd Hughes, and our podcast producer, Leah Griffin, and our executive producer, Emily Olson. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you later this week.